They mocked her at the table minutes later. The $900 million deal was gone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. Quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The grand dining hall shimmered with opulence, every surface polished to a reflective sheen, every crystal glass catching the warm glow of chandeliers that seemed to hang like constellations above a carefully choreographed galaxy of influence, wealth, and hidden agendas. And yet the room was more than a display of wealth. It was a battlefield, a delicate ecosystem where reputation, power, and ego collided under the guise of civility, where every glance and every laugh carried weight far beyond what most could perceive. And at the center of this charged environment sat Avery Cole, the CEO whose presence alone commanded attention without the need for flourish or fanfare, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating worlds that underestimated her at every turn. Worlds that measured worth in connections, not skill, in loud voices, not thoughtful strategy. And as she stepped forward, her polished shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor, the room shifted subtly, a ripple in the meticulously composed pond of polite conversation, as if the very air recognized that Avery's arrival meant something entirely different, that her power was not in the volume of her voice or aggressive displays of dominance, but in her precision, her timing, and her ability to see every thread and understand which one to pull at exactly the right moment. The table was set, servers gliding silently, offering glasses of wine that glimmered like liquid rubies, plates arranged with the exacting care of a world where presentation was not merely aesthetic but symbolic of the meticulous order governing every decision. And then it happened. The first smirk, the first whispered exchange across the polished wood that carried 1,000 unspoken assumptions. Assumptions that Avery was there to absorb, to smile politely at, perhaps even to falter under. Assumptions that underestimated the quiet calculations simmering beneath her composed exterior. And the conversation began, light at first, civil, almost rehearsed, but layered with microaggressions and subtle digs disguised as jokes, each a test of her reaction. A probe to see if she would rise to anger, reveal vulnerability, or break the equilibrium that others believed they controlled. And she did none of these things. She simply listened, her gaze steady, her posture unwavering. Yet every sense was alert, every detail catalogued in her mind like a chessboard stretching across the table, noting who laughed, who flinched, who spoke too quickly, who paused too long, because Avery understood that in rooms like this, where millions and billions hung in the balance, every gesture carried meaning, every pause could tip the scale. And as the first course arrived, plated with meticulous artistry that distracted some but did not sway her, the tension began to thicken, invisible yet tangible, a pressure in the air that made the room feel smaller, more fragile, more susceptible to collapse under the weight of unacknowledged power. And when a careless remark slipped from a prominent figure across the table, a comment meant to undermine, meant to amuse at her expense, the room's laughter was polite but cutting, the kind of laugh that assumed superiority and ignored the cost of underestimating someone who had spent a lifetime turning slight into strategy. And Avery allowed a moment to stretch, a heartbeat longer than comfort permitted, letting the silence work for her as every head at the table became aware, however subtly, that she was not reacting as expected, that her calm was not indecision but observation. And in that pregnant pause, the psychological shift began, like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward, brushing against egos, alliances, and assumptions in ways no one could yet articulate. Yet everyone felt, and the subtle choreography of the evening intensified. Phones lit up with messages, advisors leaned forward, glances flicked to each other. The room held its breath in collective anticipation of action not yet forthcoming, and all the while Avery's mind worked quietly but with ruthless clarity, calculating probabilities, outcomes, and consequences, envisioning the exact moment when a single, decisive action would convert the insult, the misjudgment, and the fragile arrogance around her into a demonstration of authority that required no words, no theatrics, just precision, patience, and timing. And as the second course was served, heavier in appearance but lighter in tension for her because she had already anticipated its placement in the evening's narrative. The subtle cracks widened, invisible to most but glaring to those who understood the dynamics at play. This was not merely a dinner, not merely a negotiation over contracts, influence, or monetary exchange. It was a test of perception, a theater where every gaze, every whisper, every polite laugh carried potential, danger, and opportunity, and Avery, seated there with her hands lightly resting on the table, allowed it all to unfold in her mind like a script she had written in advance, ready to execute at the perfect instant. And as dessert arrived, the chatter of the room reached a crescendo of assumptions and misplaced confidence, laughter punctuating sentences meant to belittle, and in that very moment, when the table believed it had already won, when they assumed her silence was submission, Avery's decision crystallized, a single, irreversible choice that would not be shouted, would not be defended, would not be dramatized, but would be executed quietly, efficiently, and devastatingly, because the greatest authority is often invisible until it is felt. And the first move of consequence was about to ripple through the gilded room in ways no one could have imagined, setting the stage for the withdrawal, the shock, and the reckoning that would leave every attendee questioning not only their assumptions about her but their entire understanding of control, influence, and the quiet power of precision. And as the final words of polite conversation hung in the air, Avery leaned back just slightly, the faintest shift in her posture invisible to most but monumental in consequence. And with a single glance at her assistant, a subtle nod that could have been mistaken for a gesture of mere acknowledgement, the machinery of her decision began to move, unseen, quiet, yet unstoppable, and within minutes, the room that had been so assured in its hierarchy, so confident in its ability to dictate terms, to measure worth by arrogance and legacy rather than skill, felt an almost imperceptible tremor as a call was made, a message sent, a chain of command executed with the precision of a master strategist, and the first domino fell silently. A $900 million agreement, once thought guaranteed, once the centerpiece of whispered deals and backhanded smiles, began to vanish from the collective expectations of the room, not with fanfare or confrontation, but with quiet inevitability, and as realization dawned, the smirks froze, the polite laughter faltered, and a heavy, almost tangible tension descended upon the table like a storm that no one had seen forming, because in that instant, every person present understood, too late, that influence is not claimed by noise, or by wealth, or by the casual underestimation of others, but by foresight, preparation, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment calls, and the silence Avery had maintained for so long now became a weapon, a force that spoke louder than any insult, louder than any attempt to belittle or dominate, louder than all the years of assumed privilege gathered around her, and as assistants scurried subtly to enforce the withdrawal, screens flashed with notifications, eyes widened in disbelief, murmurs turned to whispers, whispers to startled gasps, and the very atmosphere of the room shifted from casual confidence to cautious calculation, as if everyone suddenly remembered that the game they had been playing had rules they didn't understand, that the pieces they believed they controlled were moving according to a strategy they had never considered, and while some tried to recover, to laugh it off, to maintain composure as if nothing had changed, the cracks had already spread. Alliances previously thought solid began to strain. Subtle rivalries intensified, and the whispered calculations of who could still benefit from this table became frantic. All the while Avery remained composed, observing, noting reactions, but never speaking, never defending, because the most powerful statements are often made not with words but with consequences that cannot be ignored. And as minutes stretched into tense silence, it became clear that this was not mere retaliation, not spectacle for attention, but a lesson in authority, in the quiet enforcement of boundaries and expectations. And as cameras flashed discreetly, phones pinged, and murmurs traveled down corridors beyond the gilded walls, Avery's action reverberated far beyond the room. A signal that respect is not requested, it is enforced, that underestimation is expensive, and that calm, deliberate power is often the most terrifying force of all. And by the time the banquet concluded, with glasses emptied and chairs pushed back, the attendees left not with the satisfaction of victory, but with the unsettling realization that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted in favor of someone they had tried, and failed, to measure, predict, or control, leaving behind a room that would remember not the laughter, not the mockery, Not the polite gestures, but the quiet, devastating precision of a decision made at the perfect moment. A decision that erased hundreds of millions, fractured alliances, humbled the arrogant, and proved in the most definitive way imaginable that true authority is not claimed. It is exercised, and the echo of that exercise would linger long after the chandeliers dimmed, the doors closed, and the world outside went about its business, because Avery Cole had shown that sometimes the loudest statement is the one made without a single word, and the most profound power is the one that arrives quietly, unseen, and leaves chaos in its wake, leaving a question burning in the minds of all who witnessed it. When respect is tested, would you argue, or would you simply remove the power you brought into the room?